Welcome to Startup Stories Podcast.
We've got Mike Hagen from Bay Island Group on the call with us. It's fantastic to see you again, Mike. It's been about a month and a half since we last met. How are you?
I'm doing great today. It's good to see you again, Matthew.
Yeah, good to see you too. So just for the audience's sake, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Mike Hagen. I live in the United States, live in Washington State, and born and raised here. We live in a little community, a little kind of old fishing village out here, and our family's been out here for well over 100 years, actually since the 1880s. So we're immigrants from Europe, which is pretty cool. We're homesteaders out here. So the land that I live on out here has been in our family for like 100+ years, and it's just wonderful living out here in the country where we are. My professionally, at least, I went to school to be a mechanical engineer and went to university, actually Washington State University here in the state of Washington. So mechanical engineering. After school, got married, and I got a job in the semiconductor industry. Working for a big semiconductor manufacturer. We made substrate, which is the wafer that then you put chips on after that. So we sold our materials to like IBM and Motorola and Intel and all the big semiconductor companies. But that was a cool job. And I worked in that industry for about 10 years. I did a lot of different roles there, everything from engineering, I did management, from like production facilities, did engineering management, and just had a really neat opportunity to work for a multi-billion-dollar corporation, multinational as well. So pretty neat opportunity. And then after working there for about 10 years, I resigned to run my own small businesses. And part of my story is I've always loved running I've always like been an entrepreneur. I've always had some other business going, even when I was gainfully employed. So, when I was a little kid, I had a paper route, and then I sold coupon books, and then I mowed lawns, and, all these things throughout my life. I just see this pattern of always being an entrepreneur. So I resigned from the semiconductor world, started my own small business, and it was based in the world of photography, but I still don't necessarily call myself a professional photographer. I created businesses in that world. So, for example, I wrote a whole bunch of books, education like based books, like how to do this, how to do that. Wrote like 10 books, traveled the world. So I put together like photo tourism company. So I would take for like 10 or 12 years, I would take people to Africa and Iceland and Galapagos. So I ran a tourism company. I ran a educational company where I hired other people to teach, and this was international as well. So I had people all around the world teaching my curriculum. I did video production. So a lot of things kind of around the world of photography. And I would take pictures too every once in a while. So that was the kind of the fun part of it.
What inspires you to start these businesses in this way?
Well, I think I think a lot of entrepreneurs are kind of wired the same way. We're a little bit antsy and a little bit idealistic and maybe even naive. And, I don't sit still very well. So I'm always thinking, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? And so a long time ago, maybe when I was outside of college, after college, I just kind of realized that life is better when you're doing things you love, and when you're like your full like mind and heart is engaged with what you're doing. And I'm not saying that my time in the semiconductor world was my heart and mind weren't engaged, but it was different, right? Because you're kind of working for a corporation. So I've always just kind of had this desire to find the thing that really lights me up, and then to find a way to earn a living doing that. And so, what are those things? Well, I think as a little kid, there are certain things that really appeal to us. For me, it's like airplanes. I was like always fascinated with airplanes. And then when I was a little kid, my dad gave me a camera, as an old film camera. And I started just getting really fascinated with that. And then, left brain, right brain type of thing would kick in. And, one side of my brain's like technical, like, oh, this is like technically difficult. And I really gravitated toward that. And then the other side of my brain's like art. people, relationships. And so I found that in my entrepreneurial pursuits, I was able to combine that left brain, right brain together in a way that I could never do in a corporate America job, working for another person. So I know it's kind of a vague answer. It wasn't super specific, but at least that gets to the heart of why I like being an entrepreneur.
I love it. And so each of the businesses that you've started, they've just been passion projects essentially.
Yeah, I'd say to some extent that's true. I'm trying to come up with a business that I wouldn't do. There are things that I think as humans, like every person's wired differently. And so, I don't a baking shop. I probably wouldn't do that, even though I enjoy baking bread every once in a while. It's not the type of thing that I'm passionate about, so I wouldn't really pursue that. But photography, travel, technical engineering type stuff, I love. Manufacturing, I really get a kick out of. I love manufacturing, and then I love people as well. And so, now that I've kind of moved on from that photography based career, I did that for about 15 years. At the tail end of that, I started as a CEO for a manufacturing company. I did that for about 5 years. Now I'm wrapped up with that. So now I'm at this new phase and I'm like, okay, what are the things I truly love? I'm no spring chicken anymore. I'm still relatively young, but I've reached middle age. And so there's a certain wisdom and knowledge that comes from being middle aged. And you're like, do I want to just earn a buck, or do I want to have meaning and purpose and do things that really resonate with me in my heart? And so that's kind of where I'm at now, and why I have my new company called the Bay Island Group, where I do business consulting and I do leadership development, and I work with other businesses to help them be really great.
Yeah, walk me through a little bit of that. So what do you do with the businesses exactly?
Yeah. So to explain that, I'll back up a little bit. So at the end of my, that photo-esque business or group of businesses that I ran, I also did corporate consulting during that time. So I would work with companies and help them with their manufacturing processes, and I would kind of do that kind of on the side. But one of the companies asked me to become their CEO. And at the time, this was before COVID, I thought, okay, well, there's another challenge. I love manufacturing. Let's do it. And so I entered into an agreement with a company and the owner to be their CEO. And fast forward now, 4.5 years or almost 5 years, that time was good. We accomplished some great things, but the owner and I didn't necessarily see eye to eye. I think today you'll get a sense for who I am and how I operate. I'm pretty enthusiastic. I'm really positive. I'm also extremely pragmatic, and I have a kind of a process oriented approach. And I'll say the owner wasn't those things. He was a different personality. And sometimes you can't always suss out all the details. Anyone who's ever run a business and worked with partners, this. You just never know what you're going to get until the fire hits the bottom of the pan. So sometimes just the water boils too quickly. Anyways, I resigned from that, started my company called the Bay Island Group. And so what I do now is I work with companies, I work with owners, I help them solve problems that maybe they aren't necessarily aware of or that they need specific help with. Let me give you an example. So there's a company that I've been working with. The owner created this wonderful product, and he created about 40 years ago. And over these 40 years, he's had a viable company and he's grown it relatively steadily over 40 years. But as I've been talking to him and discussing with him, he's like, Mike, I have run this for 40 years and I literally don't know what to do next. I just don't know what I don't know. He's like, I've got ownership problems with employees who think they have equity. I need to clarify how their equity involvement is within the company. I've got profitability stuff I need to work on. I have no systems or processes. So if I, the owner, go away, nothing, like, it crashes because I'm the only one that can do the compliance work. I'm the only one that can do kind of the engineering work. And so the business is heavily contingent on me. But the truth is, he says, I don't even know how to get myself out of this predicament. So that's where I come in. And it's like, hey, let's work together. Let's kind of do the Pareto thing, right? What are the few things that have to get solved right now, which will have the biggest impact? And so for him, we had some equity stuff we had to work through. So I helped him through that. We had all kinds of process stuff. Like for those of you in business, the terms AP, AR. Those are accounts payable, accounts receivable. Your accounting systems, the billing processes. Those things had to be solved. So just start working through processes and systems to help them define those, so you can be hands off.
That's fantastic. What do you think has been your biggest challenge in doing this? Maybe your most challenging customer.
Well, I'll talk. So let me talk about biggest challenges, and I can talk about challenging customers too. But here's the thing. So here I am. I'm saying I'm a business consultant and a corporate consultant, and I think a lot of times when you come into a company and to help out, you can very rapidly help them find the problems and then even devise solutions. And because you're looking at it from an outside, but when you're running your own company, so I'll say Bay Island Group, a lot of times you still have the same questions that you're helping other organizations solve. And so, the biggest challenges almost always are finding clients and learning how to scale your business, because a lot of us assume that our product is the cat's meow, it's the best thing ever, blah 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 blah. Well, people don't just find you. And so even though me, Mike Hagen, I'm really good at manufacturing, I'm really good at organizational development and helping develop employees and build culture. Those are things I'm really good at. And I'll be honest, I'm not that great at marketing. I'm not that great at, going out and selling, so selling and marketing are things that I know I'm not great at. So those are the challenges. Is as an entrepreneur, it's like admitting where your weak spots are and finding ways to fill those in. So yeah, so those are the challenges, I think, of running business. But in terms of customers, challenges with difficult customers, oh my gosh, some of the hardest thing, I think, a lot of times is as a consultant. The hardest thing as a consultant is earning the trust of an organization and earning the trust of not only the person who hired you, the owner, let's say, but more importantly, earning the trust of his direct reports. And then beyond that, maybe the manufacturing floor. Because as far as they know, you're just some random person coming in, blowing hot air and making their lives harder and more difficult. Nobody likes change, especially manufacturing. No one likes to change the way they push the cart or drill the hole or, fill out their time card or whatever it is. And so you have to, the challenge is creating that compelling argument for the team and helping them understand that, I've got no ulterior motives here as your consultant. I'm just trying to help you live a better life. So working through that with teams there's a ton of relationship that has to happen. There's a bunch of trust building that has to happen. There's proof of, expertise that has to happen. And so that oftentimes takes a long time. So if you're an owner of a company and you bring in a consultant and you're like, hey, next week, I want you to come in and solve my material flow problem. And I want you to come in on Monday and have it done by Wednesday. And I want to spend $2,000 on. I'm like, you don't even know what you're asking, buddy. This is, I can move fast and I'm super efficient, but we gotta win the hearts and minds of your people and your organization. And that takes a little bit of time. And so that's the hard part, is convincing the owner that this is beyond just checking a box or pushing a button on a keyboard or, some formula that you just lay over the organization. This is changing culture, changing people. That's the hard part of dealing with customers. And that's when it gets difficult, is sometimes the owner goes, I'm pretty mad. I'm angry at you. I've spent $100,000 on your services and I don't see results. And so it's hard to convince them that sometimes it takes time to pull those things off.
Yeah, I agree. It is definitely challenging. So is there a process or steps that you take to build the trust with the team and the owner and to change the culture?
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily have a formula, but I have a bunch of approaches that I use. And so, okay, so I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm pretty technical guy. I can talk technology. I can, be really technical when I need to. But the truth is that all of that stuff is secondary. That's just table stakes. That just gets me in the door. The things that win the day or help the organization be phenomenally better is when the culture changes. And so to change culture, you have to be very clear about what you expect. And then you have to be relentless about holding everybody accountable to that standard. Because the minute, as an owner or as a CEO, the minute that you say, let's do this, and then you do that, everybody just writes it off and says, we're done for this year. So you just blown 12 months of progress with a single statement. So here's one of my statements. And this isn't mine. I've just used it for years and years and years. And the statement is, clarity is kindness, ambiguity is abuse. So clarity is kindness, ambiguity is abuse. So a lot of businesses struggle because the owner or the CEO or the manager isn't clear about what their expectations are. And I'll give some examples on that in a second. And then on the other end, ambiguity, having ambiguous goals or ambiguous expectations, that's abusive to your employees because they're always second guessing. What do you want? What are you after? I thought you said this, but then you did that. And now all of a sudden you've lost the trust of your people. They don't respect you anymore. And you're abusing that trust. You're abusing that relationship. So let me give you some examples. So let's say that as an owner, you say, hey, everybody, we need to improve revenue this year. So you make some statement, our goal is to improve revenue, and that's it. So as the owner, maybe you don't want to share financial information with your team. So you don't give them specific numbers or maybe specific margin percentages or whatever, but you just say, just go do that. All right, cool. So now your team's like, oh, well, we have to improve revenue. Now, maybe in an organization of 20 people or 50 people, guess what? There are 50 different ways to increase revenue. So employees, maybe in the sales team goes, hey, we're going to start offering discounts to customers so they buy higher volume. And then maybe the owner gets wind of that and reprimands his employees for giving discounts. And what they saw is their revenue went from $250,000 to $300,000. So, we just increased revenue by giving these discounts. The owner says, well, our margins are off and you guys, blah, 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 gets mad at him. So there's a perfect example where it's not really clear what the owner means when he says improve revenue. What I a lot of times coach is, hey, let's get really specific. We want to increase revenue by this amount in these categories by this date. Okay. So now everyone knows that if we go to $250,000 to $500,000 or whatever, and these are your boundary conditions, no discounts, or I give you up to 15% discount, order volume, per unit order volumes have to be K or whatever. So now it's really clear what the owner wants. And it's also clear what he's allowed to give and take on. So now your organization can go forward and really achieve that goal. That's beautiful. And as kind of pragmatic as that sounds, you'd be amazed at how many CEOs and owners don't do that. They just say, get better, go faster, stop the lawsuit, whatever. And the organization doesn't really know what the owner's after. So that's one example. I can think of another example. The last company I was CEO of, the owner said, hey, we had moved into this new building, new warehouse. And the owner said, hey, I want to get all this clutter out of this area. And that's all he said was, I need this area cleaned up. I want all the clutter out of there. So I was CEO. So I went to the team and I was explaining, okay, we got to get rid of this stuff, blah, 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 blah. And I didn't give them a whole lot of direction because the owner just said, get rid of it. So they start going on to OfferUp and Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist and start selling this stuff off. Heck yeah. And they're like, this is great because A, we're getting rid of it and we're bringing in money for the company. So the owner got wind of that and he just got so mad. He started yelling at everybody, just pissed off, really angry. And we're all like, what's the problem? He's like, I didn't want you to sell it. I wanted you to put it up on the shelves. We're like, well, the word the term get rid of implies get it out the door. So that's another example of how clarity would have been very kind. And the ambiguity led to literal verbal abuse, and so that's pretty black and white there. But, extrapolate to whatever area, HR, accounting systems, insurance, whatever. And it holds true no matter what. So always be clear and be relentlessly clear.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, are there any other techniques or strategies you use when building up leaders or future leaders within the organizations or your own organization?
Yeah. So something else that I'm a big proponent of, and it's a kind of a sword that I'll fall on for my own companies as well as other companies, is the whole thing around culture. And culture, in my opinion, is the most important thing in a company. And I know, I get it. Everyone else out there in business, you're rolling your eyes. You're like, come on, give me a break. You got to make money. You got to be profitable, blah, 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 blah. Yes, I get it. You got to make money. You can't even have a culture if you don't have a company. So, yes, you got to make money. But, after you got systems and processes for making money, culture wins the battle almost every day. Here's, my culture is defined by the owner of the company or the CEO of the company. Okay. The culture is defined by the head of the organization. So what I do, I'll just tell you what I did as CEO is I thought long and hard about the culture that I want in my company. Like, what are the attributes of the people that work here? Like, what are the work attributes? Like, how do I want them to work? What are the relational attributes of those people? And can I actually write down in words what I want that to look like? And so I spent a lot of time thinking through that. And then I found a really great model for culture, and that's Patrick Lencioni. He's a great author, and anyone who is listening today, you should read every single one of Lencioni's books. But he has this book called
Absolutely.
The Ideal Team Player. And so, I combined a lot of my philosophies with that. And he defines a winning culture, or the ideal team player, as someone who's humble, someone who's hungry, and someone who's smart. And so, just a real quick missive on that. So someone who's humble, they're willing to, like, give accolades to others. They're willing to share the win. They're willing to take responsibility for the fail. Someone who's humble is really great when, you have this big team win and they celebrate the whole group. And it's not like, I did this, I got that contract, I got this profit margin, blah, blah, blah. No, they share the win. So humble. The next one is hungry. We love people who work hard. I love it when people work hard. I love it when people put their shoulder in and just, they're like, we're going to work hard on behalf of you and the organization. So that's the hunger side. They're always asking, what's next? What can I learn? How can I be a better employee? How can I sell another 10% on this contract? So that's the hungry part. And then the third part is smart. And someone who's smart is someone who is, like, relationally smart. They can read the room. Matthew, you've been in meetings before where someone is sitting in that meeting and they're just, like, dominating the discussion, or they're, like, making some really off-color joke in a group where 50% of the people are women over 60, and they're like, you're just sitting there going, what? Are you crazy? And so they just, relational intelligence or emotional intelligence is a big part of that. So what I did is I took those terms, those thoughts, I wrote them down. I gave examples of that humble, hungry, smart framework. I said, everybody in my company, this is what I'm holding you accountable for. These are the behaviors I want you to exhibit. This is how I want you to treat people. And I gave them specific examples for the production floor, specific examples for the office staff, specific examples for the management team. Like, when we're in a meeting and Joe and Mary, you're having a discussion around budget, this is the way I want you to engage. And these are the way I don't want you to engage. So I was really clear about the culture I would allow and the culture I defined. And I would then hold people accountable to that. So let's say 2 months down the road, someone breaks the cultural value of ours. They berate publicly, or they thump their chest on a new project. I would pull them aside and say, hey, that's not our culture. You can't take responsibility for that. Your colleague made that sale. You guys made that sale together. That was a team win. So I just continue holding people accountable. And then when I found people upholding the culture in real time, I pull them aside and say, that was excellent. Holy cow, did you see how you built up your teamwork, your team player? Did you see how you worked that extra 2 hours today or yesterday? Thank you. That is exactly what we want in our culture. So, just that relentless approach to defining what you want and then holding people accountable to that. And another thought here before your next question. In order to build a culture in a company, you have to communicate it like time and time and time again, like until you're blue in the face and for multiple years. Yeah. It's been proven that you have, in order for your organization to finally get that you're serious about something, they have to hear it 7 times. 7 times in 7 different ways. So maybe 1 is an all-employee meeting, maybe 2 is a memo that goes out to everyone, maybe 3 is an email, maybe 4 is small group meetings. Your employees have to hear that thing, whatever it is, 7 times. And then you have to, as leader, you have to repeat it every month. The science says, or the research says every 29 days, but every month you got to say, hey, this thing that we all are supposed to be doing, we're still doing it. Don't forget, everybody, we're still doing it. So that's where a lot of times businesses fail, is they're like, I told them back in 2023 that this culture thing was important. No one ever listens. I'm like, no, you don't understand. You said it one time. That does not change a company.
Right. Yeah, that happens way too often where people will just say it 1 time or 2 times and then expect everybody to just fall all in line.
Bingo.
And they don't. They forget.
Yeah. So those things, defining that culture, being relentless about communicating what you want in lots of different ways, and then following up by holding everybody accountable to those behaviors. So that's a way for companies to win on strategy, is when you define, culture is not strategy. They're different things. And so every company has a strategy. They have a way that they do business, or they have an approach they are going to market. That's your strategy. But if your culture's strong, then people will find a way to make the strategy work all the time, because there's always roadblocks in business, and sometimes your strategy has to be modified. And if your culture's poor, people will just stop at the roadblock. But if your strategy's strong, if your culture's strong, people will find a way, because they know what your real values are. So they will find a way to get past that roadblock. So that's why I always invest so much time and effort into culture.
No, I appreciate that. That's awesome. So what do you think has been your biggest challenge as a business leader, and how did you overcome it?
So, I'm in my fees, been in business or businesses since I was a little kid, but professionally, at least since my early 20s. So over 30 years. There's been a lot. There's a lot. I don't know if I could say it my biggest challenge, but it maybe as a subset, the most difficult things to navigate, I think, in business, are relationships. It's almost always the relationship side of things. And maybe that's with the customers, maybe it's with suppliers, but a lot of times it's just colleagues. There's always struggles with sales. There's always struggles with profit margins. But the truth is, a lot of times, unless your product's horrible, a lot of times you can solve those problems by developing a better process, or setting very clear goals, or holding your employees accountable. So those things are solvable, but many times the relationship side of things are not solvable. So I always work really hard to be relational, and I always work really hard to solve problems directly, like relationship problems directly. And that's why I'm such a big proponent of, as a leader at least, of having regular check-ins with my employees, and clearly defining what it is they're doing, why they're doing it, and then here are your goals, or here are your KPIs. And then when we have these regular check-ins, we solve the relationship problems by being really clear up front. So maybe that's the big learning now I'm in my fees, is that I could have solved a lot of these relationship issues early on if I was really clear about what I expected, and why I wanted it before going into it. And I'll just give you an example. I'm in a business negotiation now with an organization. I'm looking to acquire this company, and I kind of went into the conversation probably 5, 6 months ago with just kind of open hands, like, just I'm open to whatever happens here, see if it's a possibility to acquire this organization. And I wasn't really clear with the owner about what my intentions were. And so now we're 6 months on, and he's not clear what he wants, and I was never clear going into it what I want. And so I don't want to say the relationship is falling apart, because I'm still good friends and colleagues with this guy. But I just realized going into it, like, man, 6 months ago, if I was like really clear that I wanted to acquire the organization and this is what I was willing to pay or contribute, I wouldn't be 6 months on with these question marks in the air. And so that's, you asked the question, what's the biggest challenge I've had to face? And maybe personally and emotionally, I'm just afraid of offending people early on, especially in my younger career. And I think now that I'm older and wiser, I just realize I can love people, I can care for people, but still be blunt. So I think in this last, maybe 3 to 5 years, I've just come around to the point that I need to be really clear about what my expectations are going into this business negotiation. And a lot of times, I think sometimes in people in business are afraid of saying what they really want because they're afraid of killing the deal or giving up too many dollars in the negotiation process. But I think I found the opposite, and that is just be really clear. Like, hey, I want to acquire your company. You said you were open to new ownership. Can I see your P&L? Can I do a quick review? I will give you an answer on Tuesday if I want to proceed further. Tuesday comes around. Hey, I want to proceed further. Can we start talking about valuation or due diligence and blah, blah, blah? Being really blunt ahead of time saves a lot of heartache later on.
No, that's really good. You mentioned this briefly, and I'd actually like to hear a little bit more about it. You mentioned wanting to get back into flying. Tell me a little bit about that. Are you currently a pilot, or how did you get into flying in the first place?
It's so if anybody out is listening to this and you're a pilot, I just want to say right off the get-go, I'm a very low time pilot. I am not like Top Gun. I am not, your, ATP guy, blah, blah, blah. So if you're a pilot, you know what those mean. But I've been into airplanes since I was a little kid. Like literally a lot of my first memories are just looking up in the sky and watching airplanes fly around. As a young kid, my dad would take me to air shows, and, this would be in the 1970s and the 1980s. And I just remember going to these air shows and seeing, jets flying and military aircraft going and small planes. I was just so intrigued. And growing up, I knew every single airplane, military or civilian. I knew everything about those airplanes. I could tell you their top speeds. I could tell you their power plants. I just I don't know what it was, but I just ingested that information and I just fell in love with it. So fast forward, never got my pilot's license. I had hoped to go in the military. I wanted to be a fighter pilot, but back in those days, your vision was such a big deal. You couldn't go in if you had corrective vision. So I kiboshed that probably when I was 17 and decided to go the engineering route instead. And then I just hesitated and waited, and, job, career, marriage, kids, all that stuff comes your way. So finally, it was like in my late 20s, I just said, I'm doing it. So I said, by the time I'm 30, I'm going to get my pilot's license. So I started down that path, ended up waiting until a little bit after I turned 30. It was 30 in a month or something. So I didn't quite meet my goal. That's right. But I was 30 when I got my license. And since then, just have kind of flown on and off and on. Again, a lot of pilots make excuses, but there's a one big truism in flying, and that is it's costly. It just costs a lot of money to fly airplanes. And so, I was corporate America dude working at that semiconductor company, making good money. And so I could get my ticket, become a pilot. And then I resigned to run my own small business. And Matthew, if you've done that, there's a period of time when you're eating beans and rice and you're happy to do so.
Yes.
And then your business grows up again. So that's kind of what happened to me. And then after about 10 to 12 years of running my own small company, I finally had enough revenue and profit to get into a plane. So I bought a plane with some friends. It was a little Aronca Aronca Chief. I say J3 because that's what I actually learned to fly in, is a Piper J3, a little propeller airplane. But we bought an Aronca. We rebuilt the thing from ground up, which is pretty cool. Got to rebuild an airplane. I enjoyed that. We flew that for a few years, and then one of our people in the flying club crashed it. He crashed the plane. He did something called a ground loop and busted the wing spar. So again, my flying dreams, I'm like, shoot, I either got to rent or I got to get into another plane. And now it's been about 3 or 4 years since I've flown. So this year I said, I'm done waiting, getting back into it. So for those of you who are pilots that are listening, I just got my flight medical reviewed last week. I got my ticket back. My flight
Come
medical is
on, that's
approved.
awesome.
So back in the plane here in the next month or so. I'm excited.
That's awesome. My uncle actually used to have a Piper J3, and
Really?
he was a pilot for an airline, and throughout the years he's had a number of small aircraft. And I had to look it up because the name rung a bell. Is the last one that he had was a Piper J3, and he's taken me up in a number of them as a little kid. I've always loved
Ah,
it. Always a
bright.
wonderful experience going up in those things.
Was it yellow? Bright yellow?
It was a
Yeah.
bright yellow.
So that's the iconic Piper J3, and they were built in the 90s. And
Yeah.
I had a good friend when I first started my pilot training. He strongly suggested I learn how to fly a tail dragger as my primary flight training. For those of you not in this world, there's two types of landing gear configurations in airplanes. There's a tricycle gear, like what you would see in a jetliner, and then there's the tail wheel. And the tail wheel, it's really dicey on the ground. It takes a ton of awareness and diligence to not crash it when it's on the ground. It's really squirrely. All of the tail wheels are. And so I didn't know it at the time, but he had very wise words. So that's what I learned how to fly in. And to this day, I'm so grateful because it really improves your piloting skill set by learning in a tail wheel. Even though the thing is tiny, it
Interesting.
weighs like airplane's just tiny.
Next to
It
nothing.
barely fits two people and it doesn't weigh much. So it flops around in the sky. But they're fun.
Yeah. What other goals do you have set for yourself over the next maybe year, 2 years?
Yeah, well, now that I'm free of my corporate shackles, did my CEO stint there for a good almost 5 years, and I resigned to kind of get back into entrepreneurship again. I'm just new under my new company called Bay Island Group, and I don't have a whole lot of clients, and I'm building it out with some input from some trusted advisors. That's my goal, really, is to build revenue in my company and build systems so that I can scale that company. It needs to start paying the mortgage again, and I need to
Of
start
course.
earning revenue there. But um, more importantly, long term, it needs to allow me the flexibility to really, I'll just use the word volunteer. I'm heavily involved in my church. I'm heavily involved in my community. I'm heavily involved with mission work. And so I want my company, Bay Island Group, to allow the flexibility for me to do other things that I'm passionate about and care deeply about. So just building revenue, just getting clients, that's not the goal. The goal is to do it enough so that I can then deploy my other skill sets for what I call kingdom values, things that I value deeply beyond business. So that's my goal for this year. And I don't have a dollar amount associated with that or whatever, but I have what I would call an emotional need and a responsibility to my wife and my church and the other things I do to make sure those things happen. I'll just say a couple of other goals and then we can go back to your question.
Sure.
Flying is a big one for me this year. So getting back in the airplane and kind of getting back into the groove there. It's just something I've missed tremendously for the last few years. So got to get doing that. And then I don't have a whole lot of control over this goal, but I'm going to be a grandpa here this fall. And I'm just super excited
Fantastic.
about that process. My son's in his mid-20s and him and his wife are expecting. So I guess I can call that a goal to be a grandpa, but it's going to happen or it's not going to happen. So,
Sure.
it's a binary response to that goal. I don't know, who knows, but I'm super excited. Yeah.
Oh, that is really exciting, and congratulations as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, but back to
So
your
my
question.
my question was, what do you feel sets a Bay Island group apart? What makes you unique?
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe I haven't done my USP, my unique selling proposition well enough yet, but I think, you know, probably what you've seen today is I'm pretty relational and I'm comfortable in my own skin, and so I think sometimes with like corporate consulting firms or business development people, because I do business development for like startups. I'm working with a number of startups right now as well. But I think a lot of times there's not a lot of emotion that goes into those conversations. There's a lot of pragmatic, like, hey, let's get our budget together. Okay, here's our marketing plan. Okay, who's going to execute this on what day? And I can do all of that. Anybody can do all of that. But I think what I do better than a lot of other companies is develop that rapport with the owner or develop that rapport with the customer, or the target client base. And I'm able to enter into relationship in a way that other companies aren't or other individuals aren't. And I think that's maybe I hate to use this term, but I'll call it one of my superpowers is the relational side of business. And I put a lot of
Good.
value on that because I honestly, you know, we're getting to some kind of existential, I don't want to say religious necessarily, but why are we on this earth? What's our purpose? Is our purpose to earn a buck? I don't think so. Work is good. I'll invoke the name of God. God put us here. Work is good. He gave us work to give us honor and purpose, but that's not our end goal. And I feel strongly that God has me here on this earth to be in relationship with people, to support people in their lives. Just even this last week, a bunch of my old employees have reached out to me. It's been almost a year since I was CEO of that organization, and I just get a lot of, what's the word, broken hearts. There's a lot of pain out there in this world, and they are still reaching out to me like, hey, can you pray for me? Can you help me with this problem that I have? And so I think, why are they reaching out to me? I'm no longer their boss. I have no vested interest in their career. Well, other than I care about them, but why are they reaching out? Well, they're reaching out because I invested so much time and care over a half a decade that they know they can still reach out to me. And that's what I value. And that's what I think, I'll call it Bay Island Group, brings to the table, is that relationship side.
Yeah, and that really there's I think a lot of people do discount the importance of that and the impact that that has. So I think that's phenomenal. That's fantastic. Maybe one final question: what piece of advice would you share to yourself back in your early 20s?
Hmm. Yeah, I don't have a well phrased sentence, so maybe just a little bit of stream of consciousness here. But it's just, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Life is short, yes, but it is actually pretty long. There's a lot of time to make mistakes. There's a lot of time to test an idea or a hypothesis or a business, or even test a relationship. And and then pull away from it if you need to, if things aren't going according to what you assume to be true. So don't be afraid. Now, I went to school to be an engineer, and then I kind of fell into that semiconductor job. I didn't fall into it. I applied for it, but I was in that job for a long time. And all of that time I'm thinking, entrepreneurship, 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 entrepreneurship. And yet the safety and security of the corporate job it's so compelling because I get a paycheck every month. I live in this house. I've got this car. I live in a suburban area. I'm not worried about my safety every day. All of these things are just, they're so comfortable. It's like a blanket. But that's not really what was fueling my passion and my fire back then. And so finally one day I was reading a Bible study actually, and saw very clearly that it said, hey, if you're being called to do this thing and you don't do it, you've got a problem. And so I looked at my wife. I said, honey, we know it's time to leave. And so we jumped ship. I resigned from my semiconductor job,
Awesome.
and it was scary as you can imagine. I had two little kids, and My wife was a stay-at-home mom, and we're like, what are we doing here? But it was very clear that I needed to leave. And so in retrospect now, 30 years have passed since then. I look back and I go, my gosh, that was the best thing we did. Oh, I'm so happy we did that. It was wonderful. What a trust exercise with each other and with our faith. And I look back, I'm like, I don't even know why did I even think about it? I should have just jumped when I knew it was the right answer. So that's what I would tell myself. Don't be afraid. If you're clear, if your spouse is
Fantastic.
clear and your God is clear, then do it.
Fantastic. That's awesome. Well, thank you for your time, Mike. It's you've got some inspirational stories. Really appreciate it.
Fantastic. I've loved having a conversation, man, and I'm sure we'll talk real soon.
We will even do this again.